What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. And as always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Bretto, and today we are here to break down my big takeaway from each of the Green Bay Packers position groups following their performance against the Cincinnati Bengals in their first preseason game. But first, hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Bretto, and you can find all my work over at Packers Wire. So now let's dive on in. And of course, we're going to kick things off with the quarterback position. There's a few different directions I could have gone with this one, but of course, had to talk about Jordan Love's performance, which I thought was overall sound, and he was efficient. It started out the way that a lot of the recent practices have, with some missed throws. There was the downfield pass to Watson down the left sideline. LaFleur mentioned afterwards that maybe he could have threw it a little closer towards the sideline to try to keep it away from the safety, or even looked the safety away a bit longer before delivering the ball. But it was a nice play by the defender. It looked like it would have been an on-target pass by Love, but again, just a good play by the defense. However, he did miss Luke Musgrave over the middle of the field, one that he absolutely should have made. Musgrave was wide open, and it looked pretty similar to the missed crossing route during family night that Love missed when he was targeting Luke Musgrave as well. The third incompletion came, again, going in Musgrave's direction on a screen that was deflected up in the air. But after that, he settled in, just like he has in several of the most recent practices as well. And we saw him do a little bit of everything. There was that downfield pass I just mentioned, although it wasn't complete. We saw him throwing on the run. We saw Matt LaFleur giving Jordan Love opportunities in the quick passing game, which was great to see, especially early on, get some of those, jitters out of the way and get a few completions under his belt. He also delivered that touch pass to Romeo Doubs that ended up being for a touchdown. So we saw Jordan Love doing a little bit of everything. If you listen to these past videos of mine, you hear me talk about the process, because that's what Matt LaFleur's emphasized. It's process over results right now, with the thought being that if the process is done correctly and done consistently, the results are going to follow. And watching that game, I really do feel like that's what we saw. Matt LaFleur commented on Love's poise, his control, getting the offense in and out of the huddle quickly and efficiently, his footwork in the pocket, going through his progressions, throwing in rhythm, getting the ball out on time. His decision-making was all very, very good, very, very sound. And for the most part, it led to good results. He finished the day 7 of 10 for 46 yards, passer rating of 112, and had a scoring drive. So again, I think it was a very promising performance for Love, and now the next step is to build upon it. Quickly, before I jump to running backs, also have to just mention Sean Clifford and his performance. He threw 2 interceptions, but had some really, really impressive throws. Some downfield throws, some into tight windows, others where there was pressure around him and he hung in the pocket. It was really an impressive performance from him. And as we're watching his performance unfold, I kept thinking back to this quote from Matt LaFleur over the last week, where he talked about how Clifford's a gamer, how he just has this natural bounce back ability. If things go wrong, it's not going to drag him down or affect him moving forward. He's just right back out there. And it really felt like we saw that fully on display during that preseason game, because there were a lot of ups and downs, but he kept fighting back and had a pretty impressive performance. On to the running back position. Emmanuel Wilson, speaking of impressive performances, totaled 111 rushing yards on just 6 carries. This included an 80-yard touchdown run, and he found the end zone a total of 2 times. Maybe being a prisoner of the moment here, but he at the very least has grabbed everyone's attention heading into joint practices with New England, heading into the final 2 preseason games for that third running back role. As we know, that competition's up for grabs. The conversation has been around Tyler Goodson, Lou Nichols, and Patrick Taylor for that role. But Goodson, like I said, he grabbed everyone's attention, and he's going to have opportunities, it seems like, moving forward. Lou Nichols missed the entire last week of practices with a shoulder injury. Tyler Goodson left the Cincinnati game with a shoulder injury. The Packers might end up being a little shorthanded in that position, which would give Wilson more opportunities to continue proving himself. And as I've talked about before, He was really impressive as a ball carrier, but ultimately, as LaFleur and Gutekunst have said, this position, this RB3 battle, is going to be decided on special teams contributions, uh, efficiency, reliability in the passing game, and the ability to hold up as a blocker. So we're going to have to see how Wilson performs in those areas specifically. But like I said, at the bare minimum, he's entered the chat. He's got everyone's attention for that third running back spot. Onto the receiver. I thought that the young pass catchers, I thought that this unit performed really, really well against Cincinnati. There's a lot of experience or inexperience, with this group, as we all know, but there's also a ton of upside and a ton of potential. And I feel like we really saw that on display against the Bengals. Christian Watson only finished the game with 2 receptions for 6 yards, but we saw his gravity, the attention that he draws from opposing defenders, which opens up opportunities for others. Like that's exactly what happened on that touchdown pass to Romeo Doubs. The Bengals were in a single high cover 1 look. Watson and Doubs were on opposite sides of the field, ran crossing routes. The safety went towards Watson's side, and then that left Doubs in a one-on-one situation. Love was able to connect with them. So we see the impact he makes even when the ball isn't in his hands. Moving on to Romeo Doubs, just as he's done, for much of training camp and just the offseason, he gets open. He's a really, really refined route runner. He can run a wide variety of routes, and you put those two abilities together and you get someone that's very difficult to cover and someone who's really, really good at creating space. Jaden Reed, we saw his speed on that jet sweep that the Packers or that Matt LaFleur dialed up for him. We saw him make a contested catch over the middle of the field, which is something he did a ton of at Michigan State. Samori Touré's definitely taken a step forward in his second season, had 56 receiving yards on 3 receptions, including 1 downfield. Dontavian Wicks, he threw a key block on Tyler Goodson's touchdown run from the 1-yard line. He had 3 catches for 68 yards. And then Malik Heath, he showcased his blocking ability, his physicality that he plays with on a downfield block and just throughout the game when asked to handle that type of responsibility. And then he too had a couple of receptions, 3 for 36 yards. He's not a burner by any means. He's not a speedy receiver, but he's someone who knows how to create separation and make plays. So just, I thought overall, top to bottom, just a really, really sound performance from the Packers wide receiver group. On to tight ends. Unfortunately, Tyler Davis left the game with a knee injury, and afterwards, Matt LaFleur said that it was a pretty significant one. So sounds like, anyways, the Packers are going to be without Tyler Davis for some time, and that hurts them in a few areas. Tyler Davis led the team in special team snaps in 2022. He was 3rd on the team in special teams tackles, and as I've mentioned on here before, he's hands down been the best blocking tight end on the Packers roster this summer in training camp. And we all know how important that aspect is to playing the position in the Matt LaFleur offense. So we already knew that they were going to rely heavily on rookies, Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, but that's even more true now without Tyler Davis. And the jump from college to the NFL at tight end is very difficult. Matt LaFleur has called it the second most difficult one on offense outside of the quarterback position. And a big part of that is because of just all the responsibilities that come with that role, the versatility, the blocking, the pass catching. But specifically in the blocking area is where we often see the steepest learning curve, within the position group for rookie tight ends. So something to keep our eyes on. Musgrave and Kraft, they're going to have to learn quickly in regards to that aspect of the game. And I'd also keep my eyes on the Packers making an addition at this position as well. Josiah DeGuara has been sidelined with a calf injury, and he's even listed on the depth chart as a fullback. So if we're just looking at the Packers 90-man roster right now at healthy tight ends, it's 3. It's Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, and Austin Allen. Chances are they're going to have to add someone to the mix. And even though this person that they might add, may not end up making the final roster, they at least need an additional body to help them get through the practices and preseason games, even from a number standpoint. The offensive line, there was a lot of movement. So we saw David Bakhtiari did not play, did not suit up. So we saw the offensive line combination we're very familiar with: Yash Nyman at left tackle, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, John Runyon, and Zach Tom. And that unit specifically played the 2 series that Jordan Love was out there, and I thought that they held up pretty well. It's worth noting that the Bengals didn't have their top pass rushers, their top run defenders on the field, but Jordan Love had the time that he needed. There were some running lanes specifically outside that group was able to create. So I thought they held up well. Moving on to when the second offensive line unit came in with the second team offense, that's really when we started to see a lot of movement. Elton Jenkins stayed in at left guard, playing the first 2 snaps with that second unit before leaving the game for a non-injury related reason. I think he was just done for the day. We saw John Runyon stay in the game with the second unit as well at right guard, and then moving over to center. And when asked about that after the preseason game, Matt LaFleur said that basically they just wanted to get Runyon some action at center, some live game reps, because they just wanted to have some emergency options, for lack of a better term, is how he kind of summed it up as in terms of why Runyon was playing there. So something to take note of, something to keep our eyes on, but at least from that response, doesn't sound like the Packers are, specifically trying to see if John Runyon can be their starting center come week 1. When Runyon was at center, we saw Sean Ryan come in at right guard. The second team tackles consisted of Rasheed Walker on the left side, Caleb Jones on the right side. Although Caleb Jones then left with an ankle injury, Luke Tenuta came in, and then eventually Luke Tenuta unfortunately left with an ankle injury as well. So there was a lot of movement. Again, in terms of performance, I thought the starting offensive line held up very well. Rasheed Walker, I thought at both tackle spots, because he moved to right tackle later in the game, played very well. But Royce Newman, Sean Ryan, very rough performances. Newman's been up and down for much of training camp, had a rough family night practice. Sean Ryan's actually been pretty good with the second unit during practices and in one-on-one drills. He was 8-0 at one point in practices in those one-on-ones. So both of them really did struggle, though. That first interception that Clifford threw was a product of pressure allowed from Sean Ryan. And then into the fourth quarter, both of these guys were still in the game, which to a degree tells us where they currently stand in terms of fighting for a roster spot right now. So definitely something to keep our eyes on moving forward as the Packers construct the back end of their offensive line depth chart. All right, transition to the defensive side. Indeed, the interior defensive line, Jonathan Ford, he's really pushing for that 6th roster spot. Matt LaFleur said a few weeks ago he's upped his game this year, and he does have a specific role that he can fill as a run defender, which, as we know, is an area where the Packers need depth. Brian Gutekunst said they have a ton of pass rush options, but it all begins with stopping the run, and Ford could be a secondary nose tackle option to TJ Slayton. However, where the path to that roster for him perhaps gets a little challenging is you just don't see very many 6-man defensive line rotations. Even though he can provide help in the run game, if the Packers are truly in a must stop the run situation, it's going to be Kenny Clark. It's going to be TJ Ford on the field, before we see Jonathan Ford. So that makes it challenging. And also the play of the rookies, Kobe Wooden, Carl Brooks, both had another good performance in the preseason game. So if those two continue to play at that level, and again, coupled with this, there just not being very many 6-man interior defensive line rotations, perhaps the Packers choose to utilize that roster spot elsewhere. But again, what I will say, Ford's doing everything he can to try to earn it, and he's done a terrific job through training camp and carrying that momentum into the first preseason game. At edge rusher, Brenton Cox. I know he's a name that's on the mind of many. High upside, high potential, undrafted rookie. Had college production in the SEC. Athletic player. Just checks a lot of those boxes that you look for, especially at a position like at edge rusher. But his training camp so far has been very quiet. Even playing with the third team defense, we've seen very little from him in terms of flashes or consistency up to this point. But his performance in the preseason game, including practices, was hands down the best we've seen him play up to this point in the summer. He was able to generate several pressures. That interception by Dallin Leavitt in the second half was because of a tip pass from Brenton Cox. So just his best performance, something for him to build off of moving forward. And as I talked about in my 53-man roster prediction, he needs to continue building on that. He needs to finish out the summer strong. But do the Packers keep 6 edge rushers? I'm not so sure. That's going really heavy at that position. And the one player who I could see that's ahead of him on the depth chart right now that I could see the Packers potentially moving on from is Justin Hollins. Reason being, Packers are in a transition year. It could make sense to go with Cox's upside, his potential on the back end of your rotation versus 1 year with a veteran who probably isn't going to be here beyond this season. And again, is going to be in the back end, a rotational role. So from that perspective, you could see why the Packers might want to choose the upside, take the swing, and see what Brenton Cox can develop into. But in terms of Justin Hollins' playing time, even against the Bengals in that preseason game, he was starting across from Preston Smith. We've seen that a lot in OTAs and in training camp. He's also taken some starting snaps with the first special teams units as well. So Cox's path to the roster is still not very clear at this point what it's going to look like. Again, if he's going to make it, that's where I see it coming from. But it starts with building on the nice performance that he had against Cincinnati. At the inside linebacker position, Matt LaFleur said he wants to see this defense be more aggressive this season, and we saw that from this unit. Joe Barry was blitzing his inside linebackers. Isaiah McDuffie, Tariq Carpenter, and Jimmy Phillips in particular were all getting after the quarterback on multiple occasions. I love that just because of how passive it felt like this unit played at times last season. It felt like the offense was always doing the dictating and the defense was reacting. Well, when you start blitzing, as a defense, you take some of that control back. Obviously, you got to get home to the quarterback or at least generate some sort of pressure to make them uncomfortable for it to be effective. But I was just glad to see the defense being the one doing the dictating versus the other way around, because the other way around is what often happened last season. At cornerback, just a really, really impressive day from rookie Carrington Valentine. He started OTAs with the third defensive unit, and now he's clearly the fourth man on the depth chart at the moment with Eric Stokes still out. Jair Alexander did not practice. Mike Spofford of Packers.com said it was a groin injury that held him out. Matt LaFleur said afterwards that it wasn't serious by any means. But with Alexander not playing, Carrington Valentine got the start with the first team defense, which we saw him playing with during Wednesday's practice and during Monday's practice this past week. And he's just continued to really build that momentum that he's created that's put him in that spot on the depth chart where he appears to be the fourth guy. He had an interception. He had 2 pass breakups. He had a nice tackle in the run game. The runner was trying to bounce it outside. He came up from the cornerback, boundary corner, and made the play. As LaFleur said afterwards, he's got the skill set you're looking for. He's athletic. He's long. And that combination, as we've seen, allows him the opportunity to make plays on the ball, get those pass breakups. Now he has a few interceptions. The one in the preseason, he had one in practice as well here in training camp. And LaFleur also talked about his just competitiveness, his demeanor, and just the great attitude that he's had since joining the team. So he's gonna, in this crowded Packers cornerback room, playing time is going to be minimal for him as a rookie. He's got Rasul Douglas, Jair Alexander on the boundary ahead of him. Keyshawn Nixon's in the slot. We haven't even factored in Eric Stokes into the mix yet. But if Valentine continues to play at this level, through the remaining weeks, you have to wonder if Joe Barry's going to carve out some sort of niche role for him just to get him on the field, because he definitely seems to have some of that playmaking ability that Rasul Douglas in him, where he just is always around the ball and ready to make a play on it. Very exciting player, and no clue how Carrington Valentine lasted until the 7th round. He's just been really impressive since he got here. Safety position. Are we starting to get a glimpse at where things stand? So Jonathan Owens, once again, was starting next to Darnell Savage, and that's been the case for really the last week. When Savage exited the game, Tavarius Moore came in and played next to Owens. And then a few minutes before halftime, Jonathan Owens came out and Rudy Ford was in next to Tavarius Moore. Then starting the third quarter, coming out of halftime, it was Rudy Ford and Dallin Levitt on the field next to each other. So based on what we've seen, and that rotation tracks with what we've seen over the last few practices, it's Savage. We know he's going to be one of the starters. Moore's the front runner for the starting role, but looks like he's competing with Tavarius Moore for that spot. And then Rudy Ford's the fourth cornerback or fourth safety option, which has been quite the fall. I mean, he went through all of offseason programs starting next to Savage. He started training camp next to Savage. And now all of a sudden he's the fourth man. My guess is that, Owens and Moore, who are free agent additions, have gotten up to speed with Joe Barry's defense. And on top of that, Ford, while he did provide stability to the position last season, he was brought here to be a special teamer, specifically a flyer on the punt coverage unit, where he was one of the best in football before coming to Green Bay. So that seems to be how things are shaking out right now. I have a little hesitation in terms of expecting more change to come, just because Matt LaFleur said they're going to continue to rotate guys. But it's been a week now, and this kind of seems to be where things are at least solidified for the moment. But again, we'll keep our eyes on one, of course, how they perform, but also what changes are made, if any changes are made moving forward. Anthony Johnson, rookie 7th-round pick out of Iowa State, he is still clearly the 6th option in this room at the moment, behind the 5 players already mentioned. Lastly, the specialists, more ups and downs for Anders Carlson. Prior to family night, he had a very, very rough week. However, over the previous week, he had made 19 of his last 23 field goal attempts. He started the preseason game 3 of 3 of extra points, knocked in a 45-yard field goal attempt, but then missed the final 2 extra point attempts to finish 3 for 5. Both of them missed to the right. Neither of them looked that good or were even that close to going in. So he still continues to ride that roller coaster. Like Brian Gutekunst said, the Packers knew coming into this summer that inconsistency was going to be a part of it in relying on a rookie kicker, and they have the mindset of being patient and weathering that storm. However, there has to be a line in the sand somewhere in terms of where your patience ends and you start bringing in some competition for them, because this young offense, they might not put up a lot of points. And so when they get into the red zone, or they have field goal opportunities, or they punch it into the end zone, like, they need to capitalize on those opportunities. This isn't, at least not that we've seen yet anyways, this isn't a high powered offense that can, overcome those missed opportunities. They need to capitalize on as many of them as they can. And if the Packers do want Carlson to be their kicker of the future, which obviously they do, they spent a draft pick on him. He's the only guy here right now. Bringing in competition and even having a different starting kicker week 1, doesn't prohibit that from happening. With the new practice squad rules and elevation rules, they can put Carlson on the practice squad if need be, to give him the opportunity to work on that consistency and to develop as a kicker. My guess right now is their Packers are going to see how next week goes. It's a big week. They have 2 joint practices with the Patriots, and then another preseason game a week from now. But you have to think bringing in at least competition. Maybe it's not someone to say you're the guy and Carlson, you're out, but at least some competition to push him and add a little extra pressure to Carlson to see, if he can turn things around or if he can find that consistency. He's got the big leg. We've seen him have good streaks in these practices, but still very, very up and down. So there you have it. Those are my big takeaways. One big takeaway from each of the Green Bay Packers position groups following their preseason game against the Cincinnati Bengals. As always, I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening. Hit subscribe, hit like. I greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. And you can find all my work over at Packers Wire. As always, friends, I appreciate you tuning in. Take care, stay safe, and as always, go Pack Go.